Alright, today we got Frodo versus Vid in TTAC. I'm probably going to pause in a moment and then come back because the amusing thing about this first game, as pointed out by a certain non-German named Stuff, is both players broke the stipulations. So this is level 1 FPC, and the stips are max of one card with a 6. Oh, that's the first one. We can look at the hands. There is one card with a 6. Each of them had one of them. Great work. Well done. So far, so good. Max of 3 total 5/3/3s or 4/4s. I skipped one, but we'll get back to it. Um, so over on Frodo's side, we see a 4/4/2/1 and but nothing else that fits those. On Vid's side, and presumably the 3/1/5/3 was his as well. I think that was. So that's two cards that fit that. That's certainly under three. And on Vid's side, we have the 3/5/3s. You can see all three of them in his hand. We're still alive. All cards must have a 1. 3/2/3/5 does not have a 1. So there's Vid's breaking the rules. But on the other side, we have no 5/4s, which 1/5/4/2 breaks. So we have both players breaking stips. This game certainly won't count. It's especially when there's like 4 stips. Oh, there's also no rares as a 5th stip. It's really easy to just miss one. And when I was reading over it, my brain just like skipped over the no 5/4s because the other three are all in fuller sentences, and that one's really short. So I just jumped to the next sentence and missed it as looking through just now. Easy to do, not an actual problem. But I do think it's a curious rule set. Because if we think about what's available, you can have one card with a 6. I'm going to guess it was Vid's choice to take the 6/1/1/4, though I haven't actually. We should know if you go back like 10-15 seconds on the video, if the 6/1/1/4 is blue and the 2/1/1/6 is red, then Vid had the 6/4. If it's the other way around, then Frodo had the 6/4. 6/4 seems a good choice to me. I like having both the strong side and the weak back side, which might make it easy for other cards to sweep. But if you think about what's available on the rule set, one of your cards is probably going to have a 6. But what can you do with the rest of your hand? You don't have 5/4s, so there's no 5/4/2/1 stuff like that bottom card in Frodo's hand. And there's obviously no 5/5s available at level 1, so you're left with either 5/3s or 4/4s. And you can only have, and 5/3/3 is the best 5/3. 5/3/3/1s are available, but you can only have 3 of those. So your hand is just between 5/3/3s and 4/4s. So your hand is very likely to be a 6/4, 3 5/3/3s, or 3 4/4s, whichever you deem more powerful, and then one kind of miscellaneous card. And so I don't love the stips here because I think there's a making of stips that says like let's get rid of the most powerful stuff to force people out of their comfort zone or force people to have to do something more creative. But sometimes the meta that's created after that is less interesting than the original one. For instance, like just to give a really dumb example, it would be really boring if everyone on like level 6 only used 8/8 corners. But if you got rid of everything else viable, you'd end up with games where people are only running 8/8 corners and the games are just terrible. You want there to be more dynamic cards as tools to do stuff. And so you're sort of, it's not, we don't want to be targeting, I think, necessarily just the best cards. It's targeting cards where the thing people will move to is still relatively interesting. And this rule set realized that what people would move to is 4/4s and 5/3/3s. It's going to be the choice left. Now, you can, I think, go 5/3/3s against 5/4s. So I'm not sure 5/4s needed to be gotten rid of here because 5/3/3s play off each other pretty well. Anyway, I don't know. Level 1's obviously not a level I'm particularly strong on. But I think you really got to be careful with this many stips, and I suspect we're going to see most players running, or So let's say a plurality, majority of players, well, a majority of the more tournament successful players just running a lot of 5-3-3s as we're seeing Vid run here. I think that's going to be a, a theme as we move forward. Now, Frodo has won this game, but of course it doesn't count. But nicely done by Frodo for however much time and effort the players put in. Cute way to win going in 5. That's not very common in these structures. I'm going to assume it was winning. I didn't actually calculate much, but what I did calculate said, oh, looks good. Nice find. This is something, it's the kind of move that is harder and harder to find as you get better. This comes up in chess a bit. I saw someone saying, and I think this is kind of true, that as they got better in chess, some of their blunders started getting punished less. Not in like long games, but in really quick games. Because a strong player will assume when you put a piece on a standard square, their brain says that square is defended, because most of the time it's defended. A weaker player will just like think, can I take that? Oh, sure, I can. Yay. They blundered. And they will catch it. And the stronger player, if playing quickly, if it's a fast game, will often give you the benefit of the doubt because 90% plus of the time at that level, it's going to be not a blunder, not a silly move. And so in Triple Triad, as you get better, you get more and more focused on the standard squares and less focused on the non-standard squares. But if you haven't played as much, and Frodo is obviously one of the newer players we have, though I think a promising new player who just came back after some break, and won this game nicely. 5 doesn't strike you as like a strong player checks 1 and 6 first, and then maybe gets to 4 and 5. My guess is Frodo does check or does look at 1 and 6 first, but is looking at 4 and 5 a lot earlier and found a really nice move there. And it can be a nice square and finding nice synergy. So obviously this was not a real game for our purposes, but a nice touch by Frodo and nicely played there. And moves in 5 like that are really cool. And I probably sounded a little condescending there, but didn't mean to. No, there's going to be just some dispute over whether the game counts. All right, what's going on? I should probably not be in the chat. It will just distract me. Let's pause the video while we figure out what's going on with that game. And we're back with game 2. Don't know what's going to happen with game 1, but let's take a look at this game 2. I really should keep the stipulations and rule sets up. So I'm going to bring that up on the side. My guess would be that game 1 doesn't count. I think it probably shouldn't count. Very clear that at least one player was aware that stips had been broken. And presumably, because I certainly would, assumed that the game would not count and played relatively quickly to move on to the next game. However, there could be some dispute there. That would just be my inclination. Okay, on to game 2. What's our rule set? We got level 4-5, same plus wall combo, but the stips are going to be kind of interesting. It looks like decks aren't very limited. In general, one thing I think is good and could be done more is having, and this is done sometimes with like things like the GBs and stuff where there's some deck limitations. But I think this could also be considered for tournaments like this, where especially with hand building, you might be able to really figure out stuff about the opponent's hands down to specific cards if the decks were more limited. Now, you don't want it to be like 2 decks where it's just very clear what the cards are and that you're very likely to be using the same cards. But limiting the decks on closed rule sets, I think, is an interesting concept because it really favors the player that does their research, and I think that's a nice thing to favor. Okay, what rules do we have? Max of 3 level 4s. So this is going to be 3 level 4s, 2 level 5s, almost certainly. Max of 1/7/7. I don't know that you want to run a 7/7. On same plus plus wall combo, like I'm very predictable, and closed you want to be less predictable, but like a pair of 6 7 6 3s is going to be incredibly powerful. On the other hand, I generally like stipulations that rather than saying you can't have any of this, saying you can just have one, I think is a nice stipulation in general. I think it means you have access to something, but you have to choose your spot on it. And I also think it makes players think they should use that whether or not they should, and that has really interesting effects. I guess following up on what I said for the first game, where I really didn't comment on the game much, apologies, but I kind of assumed it didn't count so that I didn't need to talk about it. But I think stipulations like that limit your number of a specific combo, especially when there's lots of combos available. Like if a level has one combo or two combos that are just really dominant, um, but like level 5, there's lots of fun things to do. So I like stipulations like that. All cards must have different number combinations. Okay, there goes my 6 7 6 3 plan. I now have 6 7 6 3 and 6 7 6 2, and no rares. In general, I also like the all cards must have different number combos thing. And I think a lot of stipulations are kind of worse versions of all cards must have different number combos. But it should be noted, max of 177 and all cards must have different number combos are very different rules. You could make a hand of, multiple 7 7s that obviously have different number combos. There are some cards where the exact combo really matters. Say like 8764 is much better and quite different than like 8763. But there's also cards where like if it's a 7742 or a 7741, is that making much difference? No, it is not. So I think especially this is one of those rule sets that is sort of if you're trying to limit 7 7s, all cards must have different number combinations does not do so, while max of 177 does. So this is not really thinking about this specific rule set, but thinking more generally about rule sets. This is these are stipulations that make sense together because they are limiting different things. So my thought is, in general level 4, it's thought that the 7 6s are the best cards. So if we see generic hands, that's going to be like a 7 6 3 2, a 7 6 4 3, maybe a 7 6 3 3, or a 4 2, or a 4 1. There's a bunch of choices within that. And so if you say you must use 3 level 4s and all of different number combos, you're just going to get 3 different iterations of 7 6. So if you really wanted to limit people doing that, better than all cards must have different number combos would be max of 1 or max of 2 7 6s. On the other hand, I think 7 6s are fun to play with, and having them not be exact parallels is completely fine. So I have no problem with this direction for it, but just thinking further about what are examples of rule sets where you'd want to go with limiting a specific type of card, or whether you'd want to go with limiting repeating a number combo. And I think the combinations here are generally ones that show where the strengths and weaknesses of that are. Okay, let's think about the game. Vid went with a strong corner. I tend not to like strong corners in closed. Frodo went with a half-strong opposite corner in response, and Vid has set up a slash-in 5. So the critical features of this position are 1. There is a decent chance that Vid has 4 7 7 1 exactly. But if he doesn't have a 7 7 corner facing down right, and he has already used one of his 2 level 5s, so you'd have to think his other level 5 is a 7 7 facing down right, then he doesn't have a way to ever safely play in 4 without being at risk of some combo. On the other hand, there's quite good reason to think he actually does have the 7 7 down right, both because he set that up, but because traditional hand building would have your level 5 as opposite corners, and the first corner he played was for 9, so the next corner he's going to have is for 1 for his other level 5. And I think it would not be an unreasonable prediction. Also, if we consider the card exactly 4 7 7 1, it would make a lot of sense for Vid to play this card in 5. It sets him up in all of 2 4 and 6, 2 4 6 8 with the same card. I think that card exists. I'm not sure exactly, but I think it does. 4177 definitely exists. Does 4771 exist? If I was Frodo and I was playing, I would now look this up. And Turds created a nice interface to look things up that I no longer have the link to. But the easiest way to look this up would be to go to like my cards, levels, click 5, and search 4771 with commas. Doesn't exist. Great. That's very helpful. There might be other cards that fit that nicely, but okay, we get a slash. I think this slash is a disaster. I think Frodo's move in 1 can't be played. I think you can't go for the slash here. Specifically, the slash with weak numbers facing out, because it's too easy for Vid to do what he did. Now you'll notice he didn't have the 4771. He did have the 4772. So I wasn't like so far away from calling that card, and you'll notice it was opposite level 5s. So there was some predictability here. But I think you can't go for this move in 1 because it's just so easy for Vid to have a triple capture at the end. The numbers facing out are not particularly high. If you're gonna go for an X on second turn, you need there to be high numbers facing out because you need there to be something they can't take. Now, maybe Vid himself has put enough high numbers facing out, another reason I don't like strong corner starters, that he fails to capture something at the end. Does he have another card that can land in 4? Probably. He certainly needs something that can take that 7 facing up, but a card that does that, something like 3674, can't necessarily flip what's in 5. So, depending on how he's set that up, like he might have something like 6363, but again, that's not going to flip 5. There's a bunch of cards that flip 7, and he has to have something that flips 7 from 4 in his hand, but a lot of those cards don't flip 5, and he just used up the card that does. So I'm really uncomfortable with how Frodo has played it. I think I mean, I don't like defending the X in closed combo, but even if you do like defending the X in closed combo, I think you have to put out fairly high numbers. And what Frodo has done is tried to keep high numbers. You know, he has both of his level 5 still in hand, and he has played cards he can recapture easily, but he's on second turn, not first turn, so he doesn't have last turn. The critical thing is whether Vid can capture stuff easily. So I think Frodo's hope now is almost entirely that Vid has put out cards that he himself can't recapture. And I think you don't want to rely on that. On the other hand, it's a very open question over whether Vid can recapture. I think Vid almost certainly had something good for 6 and 8 because the 3 to 6 gap is the same in both. And so I think Frodo did a really smart thing here. You have to block 6 and 8, or 6 or 8. If you play either 2 or 4, I think it's too easy for Vid to block the other. That gets rid of the squares he's least likely to have something, 2 and 4, because he has used up a card that was good for those squares and leaves the things he's best at. Getting rid of 6 and 8, I think, was really smart here. I would expect Vid to play 8 here, but he doesn't still have 4772 in his hand. It's not. Yeah, so he does play 8, and maybe he has double numbers down right again. He has a level 4 left. He's used a 7633 and a 7632. So 3674 remains possible. But that actually could lose if they go in 2 in combo 5. What have we seen for corners? We have seen 4 corners from Vid. So decent chance that his remaining card is some kind of utility card. 6263 would be pretty good here. But that's probably a level 3. I think some of the 6362s are level 2s and some are 3s. Most are level 3s and maybe one is a 4. I think they're mostly 3s though. They might be all 3s. I'm not sure. He does go 2, which I think was good. I think Frodo played the post X really, really well. And like, there's a very good chance he loses here, but I think this was his best shot by far. Yeah, he does lose. Okay, Vid had both squares. Yeah, and if Vid has both squares, yeah, Vid had both squares with both cards basically. I guess the only way Frodo could have tied is Frodo actually has to start in 2 or 4, Vid plays the other, and then Frodo plays 8, and 2, 3, 6, 7, and cast and not have combos through 5 matter, doesn't recapture 3. So you have to start in 2, flipping 3, Vid plays 4, then you play 8. You can't know that. You have no way of knowing that. I really like how Frodo played it. I think it turned out that Vid didn't have 6 and 8, but it seemed so likely to me Vid had 6 and 8. Maybe I'm just wrong, but I thought it was more likely that Vid had 6 and 8 than that he had 2 and 4. That probably is wrong, because as much as 2 and 4 and 6 and 8 both parallel, like there's double numbers one way and there's a 3 gap the other way. But if you're going to only have one of those, you set up so you have the double numbers. I just couldn't think of level 4s. I didn't think of 7-4-4-4 that had both squares in a comfortable way that made sense for Vid's hand once the 4-7-7-2 was out. But I guess it does make sense because you have to have some captures there. Those are the squares you have a chance to be dead. So you have to have some captures there. But I still, even with that, I like how Frodo played the end game. But I think you just can't go for the X. It's too easy to be swept. And if you're going to go for the X, you need to have high numbers sticking out, such that when Frodo... Now, Frodo went in 6, which had this high 6 facing out from 3. And, you got to challenge with something like that. And he did pick the square that I really think was the best square in practical terms. Again, I really like how Frodo played the end game, but he was also maybe not solve or lost if this was open, but was definitely going to be lost in closed if Vid had decent cards left. And Vid did. So nicely set up by Vid to punish this, but also, like, he really... You can't go into the X. One thing about closed, and one thing about non-combo is if combo is not in play, and first turn can take it every moment they want and play structurally correctly, they win. And in the X, it's really easy to play structurally correctly. There have been no points you've been kind of tricked into doing something incorrect, and if they go in 2, as long as you go in 4 or 6, or in this case, if they go in 6, as long as you go in 2 or 8, you're playing structurally correctly, and really no one goes in 4 with any frequency there. So your opponent is very likely to go structurally correctly, which means there has to be something at some point they can't take, which means you have to have high numbers facing out. Now, you might say this changes with combo, but the X, despite having so many things on diagonals, is actually quite often one of the least combo-oriented positions from the second turn perspective, because anytime you slide, you are sliding through 5. If you're sliding based on a corner card, it's very easy for them to block in the corner card. So the only serious sliding you can do is around 5, and they are guaranteed to have interaction towards 5 after you play your last move. So the X is actually, again, despite the diagonals, from a second turn perspective, not a combo-oriented strategy. It is instead has to be I have high numbers facing out, you can't do stuff with strategy. And I think that is possible. Like, I don't think it's ridiculous to go for the X in closed combo and defense. I think there's better choices. I don't go for it, but you could have good results doing it. But I think you really have to have high numbers facing out. And I think this is a game that really strongly shows that, because, again, I think Frodo played perfectly for the end game and was just guaranteed to lose it. Yeah, I really like the choices he made, and I think meeting 7 with 3 was fine. I think the losing move of this game was 6-5-1-6-1, I guess is what I'm saying. I think, like, obviously you can lose a closed game playing perfectly. It happens all the time. Losing this game is not why there's a problem here. But I think there was a move that made the game sure to be lost rather than will they have the right things? Will I have the right things? It locked in the loss. And I think that's interesting. I think the X is... not most players' choice in close these days. It used to be much, much more common. But I think there's the very good strategy of first turn puts out low numbers and they're just going to have enough captures at the end. And if second turn allies with first turn, and yes, I will also put out low numbers, then first turn is just going to win a huge percentage of the time. The only chance for Frodo to win or tie as it played out was if Vid didn't have combos on cards he himself had put down. And yeah. So, okay, we're going to stop here. That's all we got. First game almost certainly won't count, I would guess, but I think Frodo played a really cool move in 5. Those are pretty rare, and there are a bunch of examples of strong players missing really good moves in 5. So that's a very cool move. And yeah, one that cuts up the board nicely. It's one of those moves I should honestly consider much more than I do, because it brings the game to an actually normal formation, right? We've all gotten that setup out of the Z, where you have a Z, say 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, and someone plays 9. And you have the same setup as after 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, and someone plays 5. It's not a, obviously incorrect setup or move to make. And it's easy not to check. And it has been missed. A bunch of move 6 misses by really top tier players have been 5 in those kind of structures, because they're complicated structures. There's so many interactions available with the middle row empty that it's really tricky to evaluate. So that's a really cool move. I don't think it will count, but I think that's a very cool move. And in the second game, I think we see the problem of, and I talk about this a lot, but first turn wants low numbers facing out, second turn wants high numbers facing out. These things are fundamentally beneficial. And especially in the X, we can see how much second turn putting low numbers out is aiding the cause of first turn. And I would say Frodo made 3 out of 4 moves that if we had a perfect closed player, it would either say that was the perfect move or would say it was very close to the perfect move. And he made 1 move. So out of the 4 moves he made, I think he made 3 moves that were just his best chance to get a result. And the 4th move guaranteed he was going to lose. And the 4th move happened to be the second of the game, or very close to guaranteed. But it's really to say, like, he did everything right except go into the X with low numbers facing out, which is just, in my opinion, impermissible. Okay. Hopefully that wasn't like too strongly worded. I think it's a really interesting thing. A lot of times, like when I talk about my own games or am watching a game, I get to talk about things from kind of the framework with which I play. But especially in closed, which I've been talking about a bunch recently, I play a relatively narrow set of positions. For instance, I don't defend the line or very much, because I tend to meet center starters with corners. And so I defend the slash and the J, but not the line. And there's lots of structures I just don't get in closed games, but are interesting and are worth considering. And because I don't aim for them doesn't mean they're wrong. But we got to think through where they're going to be viable and where they aren't. And this was just, I think, not how you can play the X. I would really be interested. I hope we get more X's throughout TTAC, because I would be interested if we get examples of them performing better. Because I think, and this has come up in a couple interviews, there have been a couple people who've kind of said, I don't really play the X on second turn, but I think it's better than people think it is. I feel like I'm remembering that correctly. I remember it coming up somewhere that it was a little surprising, and more than once, of someone being like, "Yeah, I think the X is okay on second turn and a little underrated there, but you gotta do it well. You gotta move into it with the right theses." And I think the right thesis for it is, I need high stuff facing out, and especially on that that 4th move of the game and that second turn of the for the second player. because if the opponent has gone into the slash, if they played five, five, this was, but especially in this order, actually, 7-3-5, the opponent played five after three was played, which means they had choices to do other things, and this was the move that felt the most comfortable setup for them. So they very likely have play against your card in three, and they very likely have play against their own cards. So you really need to put something on the board on that fourth turn that there's a chance they don't have play against. And the great thing about playing 1 or 9 is they don't control it. They don't get to play on a diagonal. Every move that interacts with 1, like that can set up against 1, 3, 5, and 7, have already been occupied. So there is no way they can set up further against it. So they either have it now or they don't. And if they don't have it now, you've just gotten your tie. And if they do have it, okay, you lose, but you created more challenge than you otherwise could have. And they still need to have it while having the card that has it paired with another square and being able to get the extra captures. So as soon as you create a little bit of difficulty, you really got a shot at getting that tie, or even potentially a better result, though rarely a better result. Okay, we'll stop there.